All right, now that we have a basic understanding of what a push and a modal segue is and how you can use the two and in what context they should be used, I want to show you how to implement them yourself. And the way how I'm going to do this is by creating a very simple clone of the contacts app that we saw on the previous slide. So first, let me actually go and delete some of the classes that I got from the single view application template when I created this brand new Xcode project here. So I'll remove this view controller class, and also I'll remove the initial view controller scene from the storyboard. Instead, similar to the contacts app, we're going to start out with a table view controller that I'm going to drag in from this area down here. And first thing that I want to do here is I want to set the reuse identifier of our cell. We're actually just going to use the basic table view cell style here, and I'm going to call this the contact cell. And we also want to make sure that this is the initial view controller so that the application knows what to load on startup. So let's go ahead and see what's happening when we run the application. I expect to see an empty table view controller at this point in time. All right, while the simulator is loading, let me already create the corresponding code file for this table view controller. So that's going to be a subclass of table view controller that I'm calling contacts table view controller. And I'm adding it to my project. Bring it up here and delete the boilerplate code that is generated for me, as I'm not going to use it here. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean up the file a little bit. And I also don't need number of rows and section because we only have one section in this particular case. And now we already have a good overview of the file. And so, as usual, when we're implementing a table view controller, we need some kind of a data source, which is going to be represented by an array, and that holds our model items. So in this case, the model is represented by a contact, and I'm going to make it simple and actually use a string as a model here because I want to keep it simple for the purpose of this demo. So it's going to be an array of strings, and here I will add two names to the array of contacts. And when we want to implement a table view, the first thing we always have to do is we have to tell the table view how many rows it should render. And we can do this by implementing number of rows and section. And the answer, of course, to this is as many contacts as we have in the array. So we just return contacts.count. Then we also have to implement cell4row at index path. The first thing inside cell4row at index path that we have to do is we have to get a cell. We obtain the cell from the table view by calling dequeue reusable cell with identifier. We're using the same string. Notice it's exactly the same string that I set as the reuse identifier for the cell right here in the storyboard. So that's a very important part. If we don't do this correctly, the app is going to crash. But this string is contact cell, and I'm writing contact cell here, so the table view will be able to acquire the cell from the storyboard, and then I can configure it right here inside cell4row at index path. In this case, because we're using the basic style and we don't have a custom cell, I can just use the text label property of UI table view cell, and I assign it to the current contact that the table view needs the information for. And then finally, I'm just going to return the cell. And now we've implemented cell4row at index path. So if I run the application now, I expect the two contacts to be displayed. In fact, here the simulator from before has loaded, and we see that we have an empty table view controller. So now let me run the application again. but I forgot actually one thing. So I need to make sure that the view controller that is inside the storyboard has a custom class, and that this custom class corresponds to the class of the file that I just created. So I can set this here in the identity inspector of the view controller. Now that we've connected this table view controller with the code file, the app is going to know which code to execute and that it needs to execute the code from this file. And as expected, we see the two names of the people that I added to the array. All right, so let's next create the opportunity for us to add more view controllers. Or actually, let's first start with the detail view. So for the detail view, I'm going to add a new view controller to the storyboard. And for the details, as we said before, we have the push segue. And the way how you create this in storyboard is just I can control drag from some UI element on a view controller to the new view controller, and then I release the mouse and can select the kind of segue that I want to use here. And what we're really using is a show or ShowDetail segue. Here I will actually select ShowDetail, and then if we now inspect this ShowDetail segue, actually the show segue here, that's a push segue. So we're pushing a new view controller on the stack. But we're actually not quite done. So let me run the application right now and let's see what's happening. And I told you before in the previous video that a push segue always slides in the new view controller from the right. But as we'll see here, this is actually not yet the case. And the reason for that is because we are missing a UI navigation controller. Let's give the simulator a second to load so that we can verify this. Did I actually already run it properly? So if we are using a push segue, we always have to use a navigation controller as well, because navigation controllers will actually keep track of the stack of view controllers from the navigation hierarchy. So if I click on this right now, the new view controller kind of slides in from the bottom. We don't actually see this very well, but of course it's sliding in from the bottom, and that's because we don't have a navigation controller yet that is able to manage the stack of view controllers for us. So how to resolve this? We could just drag in a navigation controller here and then connect it to the table view, but there's actually an easier way through Xcode. I can do it by selecting the context table view controller up here, and then in the editor, I select the embed in option and then the navigation controller, which is going to take care of this process for me. And the important part to note about this also is that now the UI has changed a little bit at least, because the functionality that we now get from the navigation controller also includes the navigation bar, which we see on top here, and the back button. So if I now click, let's see. So this is a push segue. Let me actually recreate the segue. Maybe I did something wrong here. I'm not 100% sure. Recreate it, show. So if we inspect the segue again, it's a push segue. So let's go ahead and run the app once more to see if it's really true that we have the push segue here. So now we see that the new view controller actually slides in from the right. And we also get this back button up here for free, which is also a feature that comes from the navigation controller, which is actually pretty neat and helps us to navigate through the view controllers that we have on the current stack. Also, one quick note that I want to make about the navigation bar that we get for free. You can set the title of the navigation bar by setting the optional property on a view controller, which is just a string. And by setting this property, you'll see that now we have the title contacts displayed in the navigation bar up here. And on the detail view controller, of course, we also want to display the name of the person that we selected on the previous view controller, on the table view controller. So how we're going to do this is we need to pass this information between view controllers. And this is actually a pretty simple task, but at the same time, it's confusing to some people. So let's quickly dig in and see how we can do this. So first, we need to create a new view controller, which is going to be just a subclass of view controller this time. So not a table view controller anymore. And I'm going to call it contact detail view controller because we want to display some details about the contact that we selected. And it's just a regular UI view controller subclass. It doesn't have any functionality yet. And I'm going to set this in storyboards so that the detail view controller that we're showing here actually is this class, and the app knows what code to execute. So now I connected the two classes, and let's now go ahead in the contact detail view controller and create a property that is called contact. And that's just going to be a string, and I'm going to make this an implicitly unwrapped optional. And we'll receive the string from the other view controller, and then inside view.load, we'll take the string and assign it to the title so that the name of the person will be displayed inside the navigation bar. All right, now that we've got this code here, we only need to make sure that we actually pass a value to this view controller. If I run the app right now, and if I click on a contact, the app is actually going to crash because I'm using the contact right here, but I'm not yet assigning a value to it. So let's investigate that very quickly. So if I click on here, the app is not crashing. Is the code executed? It is. Well. Okay, so I guess it's because the title is actually an optional string. So we're assigning nil to nil, so it's actually fine. If the title was a non-optional string, then the app would crash at this point. But anyways, let's actually go and pass the name of the selected contact over to the contacts detail view controller. And the way how we do this is by implementing prepare for segue. Prepare for segue is a function that is called for you before a segue that you set up in storyboards is executed. So in this case, we only have one segue. Usually you would want to check for the segue's identifier. So you would have some code that goes like this. If case segue identifier equals my segue identifier. If you have multiple identifiers at least, but in our case, we only have one segue. So for now, we don't need this. So what we can do in this function now is that we can get the destination view controller, and the destination of this segue actually is the contact detail view controller that we just created before. How we're doing this is just by creating a new variable right here, contact details view controller, and that is the destination of the segue. And we actually need to cast it to be the contact detail view controller as well. Now that we've got access to the contact detail view controller, we need to figure out which was the contact that was selected. And the only component inside the context table view controller right now that has access to this information is the table view. Of course, you could create a property here that would store the selected index path, and then you could implement did select row at index path, which is part of the table view delegate protocol. But there's actually a simpler approach where you can just say the selected contact is the one that has been index path for selected rows. Sorry, index path for selected row. And this actually gives us access to the index of the row that has been selected. And I guess we need to take the row of that one as well. So now we've got the selected contact retrieved from the contacts array, and now we can go and assign it to the contact detail view controller like this. All right, so this should already do the trick. So if I run the application again, we should see the name of the selected contact in the navigation bar of the detail view controller. Here we go. I select a contact and we see the name of the contact in the navigation bar.